Good morning, I'm Bonnie Gardner, co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our forums are always free and open to the public, and we encourage you to attend. You can find out more about our forums by going to our website at www.austinuu.org. And now I'm going to introduce Dr. Phil Richardson, who will be introducing today's speaker. Phil? Thank you.
Welcome. Dr. Toby Johnson is a former Catholic monk and comparative religion scholar, psychotherapist, gay therapist, bookseller, pardon me, editor, book designer, novelist, gay cultural commentator. Other than that, he's been doing nothing. I originally got to know Toby as one of the original mission sisters in the early 1980s. Most of you probably don't know this group. What it was a book group where we reviewed the blossoming gay literature of the time. Very informative. Dr. Johnson is the author of 5 nonfiction titles that chronicle the spiritual wisdom he gained with Joseph Campbell, his mentor. The titles include Gay Spirituality, The Role of Gay Identity in the Transformation of Human Consciousness, and Gay Perspective, Things Our Homosexuality Tells Us About the Nature of God and the Universe. He's also authored 4 gay novels, including Two Spirits, A Story of Life Among the Navajo, written with Walter Williams. This novel, in my mind, was one of the first books that got it right about gay people and how they're a vital part of all communities. Toby currently lives in Austin with his husband of 30 years, Kip Dollar, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you. That sounds very complimentary. Let me ask for a show of hands. How many of you know who Carl Jung is? Everybody. Isn't that wonderful? So you know that in the Jungian model, a human life can be understood as a journey, a spiritual journey. And Jung observed that along that journey to wholeness, to health, to mental health, and to being a good participating person, there are various archetypal figures who appear in your life. One of those archetypal figures is known as the wise old man, one of the guides who shows the way. Through some happenstance and good fortune, my wise old man was Joseph Campbell. I can't think of a better one. I started talking about what I got from Campbell, and I've been talking about it now since the early 80s. So my talk is The New Myth. This was an idea of Campbell's, a big idea towards the later part of his life. What is the new myth? What is going to happen to religion as we reach modern times, the scientific times? In my studying Campbell and being part of I was part of the crew, and I'll come back to this, that worked his talks. So I got exposed to a lot of Campbell, and I came to an understanding of what was behind what he was saying. And it's what I think the new myth is that he was asking. What is the new myth? A transformation of religion and myth. I want to say, I think everybody should begin every talk with this. This is just my opinion. I could be wrong. In the modern world now, we make a distinction between spirituality and religion. Unitarian Universalism is sort of somewhere in the middle, isn't it? A little bit of church, but not much religion, and spirituality with getting together. I think the big question here is, what am I rather than what is God? The focus shifts to the human experience of what it means to be conscious of what we are as beings. Spirituality is about method. The techniques and imagery that we use to about what we believe affects how we live. If you raise dogs, you think about dogs as part of your life and the meaning of your life. If you are an electrician, you think about electricity and serving people, allowing them to hook up into energy fields. That becomes a model in your life for what your life means. I think that is very much how religion works. We use these symbols that come down to us to give meaning to our lives. And it makes a difference in how we live and the kind of vibes that we put out. Depending on how we think of ourselves and how we feel about ourselves affects how we treat other people and how other people experience us. When everybody's happy, everybody's happy. There is a tremendous change going on in how we understand religious truth. Science has come along with a kind of ultimate reality that the old myths didn't have. We see this today with the issues about creationism and evolution, and whether were there dinosaurs on the ark. We saw a cute cartoon the other day that showed off in the distance you can see the ark, and down close there are two dinosaurs, and one is saying, "Oops, was it today? Was that today?" We have been exposed to other religions in a way that people before us hadn't. Television allows us to hear stories about Buddhism, Hinduism. We see all this stuff that's constantly being shown us about how people live around the rest of the world. Exposure to other religions changes how you think about your own religion. It just can't be that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. How is that possible? How can all the gods be real? How can all the myths be true? Well, of course, the answer is that they all mean something. And this is the main point, in a way, behind Joe Campbell's teaching. You have to rise to a high enough perspective to see how everything can be true. Well, let me tell you how I met Joe, briefly. And I call him Joe, and I'll tell you why. Back in the early 1970s, I was living in San Francisco, attending a school called the California Institute of Asian Studies, working on a degree in comparative religion. And I saw an announcement on the bulletin board that Joseph Campbell was giving a lecture at a retreat center up in Ukiah, California. I had read The Hero with a Thousand Faces, his main book, for a class in Jungian interpretation of literature in college, and it had meant so much to me. It had sort of explained religion, that when I saw that Campbell was giving a talk, I wanted to go see that. I was a poor hippie flower child at the time, and so I applied for a work scholarship. They asked me to come up a day early to help clean the building, so I arrived early. Well, Campbell also arrived early, so I had an opportunity to meet him personally before all the crowd arrived. There were two of us who were the work scholars who arrived early, and then there were some people who were on staff at the place. When he walked into the kitchen where we were all working, we all turned and said, "Oh, Dr. Campbell." And the first thing he said was, "Call me Joe." You know, there is a movie out these days called Call Me Joe about him. Everybody had that experience. Here's a little bit of inside knowledge. The reason why he says, "Call me Joe," is because he did not have a doctor. Part of his story was that he had been working on a degree program at Columbia in linguistics, and was studying the German language, and had gone to Europe to study under Heinrich Zimmer, and was going to assist Zimmer in editing his works. And in the process, Zimmer was an Indianologist. In the process of being exposed to Zimmer's work, Campbell learned about Hinduism and the whole panoply of gods. This was a Roman Catholic kid, who ends up in Europe exposed to the world. And when he came back, he wanted to change his dissertation topic from German language to the meaning of myth. And his dissertation committee refused to accept that change. And he ended up dropping out of Columbia, and so never got his doctorate. So while he was Professor Campbell because he taught at Sarah Lawrence College, he wasn't Dr. Campbell. And I think the reason he always said, "Call me Joe," was to avoid the issue of having to say, "I'm not really a doctor." Well, from that experience of meeting him at that initial seminar at the Man Ranch seminars, I was invited to join the staff of the Man Ranch, which had summer programs for the next 5 years. And then I continued to work with a little group that worked Campbell's appearances when he came to San Francisco for the rest of the 1970s. And I started writing him, and we corresponded. And he was a very generous correspondent and would write wonderful letters back. I was enamored of him and would write how much I loved what he wrote, and he would say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." And there's a way, because he taught at a women's college, he wasn't exposed to men. And I think on some level, Campbell was heterosexual and was married. He married one of his students, which these days you're not supposed to do, but she was a dancer. Martha Graham was one of the teachers at Sarah Lawrence, and Joe's wife, Jean Erdman, was Martha Graham's star pupil. Jean Erdman, and she was a dancer, New York dancer, choreographer on Broadway. I think she did not want to have children because she had to keep her body together. Maybe they simply were infertile, whatever it was, they didn't have children, and intentionally said that they would consider their works their spirit children. So in a way, Joe lived like a gay man, and as a gay man myself, I identified with that. That is childless, and actually he lived down in the neighborhood around Gay and Christopher Street, in a high-rise building, a tiny little apartment. I once visited the apartment. I want to sort of share simply kind of what I learned from Campbell. First of all is the idea of myth. Commonly, we use the word myth to mean falsehood. But of course, in comparative religious studies, that is not what it means. It's used to mean a pattern of ideas, of stories, of symbols, of metaphors that are designed to influence how people think and how they behave and how they treat other people. Let me read you a very dense but beautiful quote from Campbell. It was reading this, and I've read this so many times in my life, I think, which has explained to me what religion was. I was in Catholic religious life when I was first exposed to this and questioning, what am I doing? I was sort of beginning to understand that I was gay, although this was back in the 60s and 70s when you just didn't know what those things meant. But I knew I was different, and I knew that I was very religious, but I also knew that, well, once I'd been exposed to Campbell and I'd learned it, I took a class about Buddhism, and I began thinking about this. This is from The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And so, to grasp the full value of the mythological figures that have come down to us, we must understand that they are not only symptoms of the unconscious, as indeed are all human thoughts and acts, but also controlled and intended statements of certain spiritual principles which have remained as constant throughout the course of human history as the form and nervous structure of the human physique itself. I put some asterisks on this to say, if he were alive today, 50, 70 years after writing these words, I think he would have understood that we now know that the form and nervous structure of the human physique itself changes. And evolution is still going on, and our brains are evolving. What he's right is surely true, that these symbols are worked somehow into the structure of our bodies and our brains, but they are also changing. Briefly formulated, the universal doctrine teaches that all the visible structures of the world, all things and beings, are the effects of a ubiquitous power out of which they rise, which supports and fills them during the period of their manifestation, and back into which they must ultimately dissolve. The apprehension of the source of this undifferentiated yet everywhere particularized substratum of being. You get that? We are all particularized substratums of being. And the being that we're all part of is in fact undifferentiated, but we experience differentiation from it. Apprehending that is rendered frustrate by the very organs through which that apprehension must be accomplished. The forms of sensibility and the categories of human thought so confine the mind that it is normally impossible not only to see but even to conceive beyond the colorful, fluid, infinitely various, and bewildering phenomenal spectacle. The reason you have to practice meditation is to stop all of this from running in your head, because this out here is so absorbing and demanding, because it's real. The function of ritual and myth is to make possible and then to facilitate the jump beyond the senses in the category of human thought by analogy. Forms and conceptions that the mind and its senses can comprehend are presented and arranged in such a way as to suggest a truth or openness beyond. And then, the conditions for meditation having been provided, the individual is left alone. Myth is but the penultimate. The ultimate is openness. In Buddhism, this is called shunyata, emptiness. That void or being beyond the categories, into which the mind must plunge alone and be dissolved. Therefore, God and the gods are only convenient means, themselves of the nature of the world of names and forms. Though eloquent of and ultimately conducive to the ineffable, they are mere symbols to move and awaken the mind and to call it past themselves. Notice that I took this off the Amazon, so it's got this little look inside, which is to advertise the Amazon search inside feature. But that's the secret, isn't it? To find God, look inside. Bring the mind away from the bewildering phenomenal spectacle out here. Come inside. That's where consciousness is. Faith has it backwards. Let's see, I went too far. Well, I'll just say it. Faith has it backwards. Traditionally, when we were growing up, it was like, you had to take things on faith because you couldn't necessarily see them. You had to believe it. I don't think that's what the ancients meant by faith at all, and the way the myths portrayed what was going on. When they saw the sun moving around the earth, or the who is it? Helios in the chariot. They actually thought that's what was going on. It wasn't as though you would have to take the myths on faith. The myths described experience. It's by our modern times when the myths no longer seem to describe what we are experiencing. We now see the universe out there